Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Petrell. I am the Director of Communications for Maryland Realtors, and we have an exciting panel today to talk about racial inequity in housing. We are going to open it up with a short announcement from our CEO, Chuck Caskey, who is going to help to frame this discussion, and then we will go forward in there and hear from the Congressman and Delegate Barnes, Chief of Staff Dwayne London. So Chuck, please take the stage.
As the old saying goes, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Systemic racism refers to the oppressive racist realities that have been institutionalized and manifest in all of society's parts, including the economy, politics, education, among others. So again, good afternoon. As Dan said, I'm Chuck Caskey, CEO of Maryland Realtors. And we're committed to addressing inequalities, especially in light of organized real estate's role in perpetuating discriminatory housing policies. In The Color of Law, which is required reading for anyone serious about understanding these issues, Richard Rothstein provides troubling insight into the history of racial discrimination in America. He describes the impact of residential segregation and the role that state entities and private entities played in creating and maintaining the nation's racial status quo. Black Americans were unconstitutionally denied the means and the opportunity to live in many neighborhoods. And because this denial was state-sponsored, the nation is obligated to remedy it. Local, state, and federal governments must take responsibility for the economic and social disparities, and we are eager to begin the conversation about what that looks like. And we are going to be part of this solution. It's my great pleasure to turn the program over to Jessica Coates, who's been CEO of the Howard County Association of Realtors since 2018. Not only is she having an impact in Maryland, the National Association of Realtors recently appointed Jessica to chair NAR's Association Executives Young Professionals Network Forum. Before joining our Maryland family, she served as Vice President of Government and Community Affairs for the Birmingham, Alabama Association of Realtors. Thank you, Jessica, for moderating this webinar. Now I'm going to go away and you can take it away. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you for that amazing introduction. Before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to take a moment to invite a couple of our leaders, some elected officials on the national and state stage to speak on this subject. Chuck, you definitely set the tone for today's discussion. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce our first guest, the Honorable Anthony Brown, that currently serves as Congressman to Maryland's 4th Congressional District, encompassing portions of Prince George's County, as well as Anne Arundel counties. As a veteran, Congressman Brown serves as Vice Chair of the House Armed Services Committee. Before that, he served 8 years as Maryland's Lieutenant Governor. Congressman Brown, welcome. You have the stage.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica, and welcome to Maryland. Thanks for your leadership with the Howard County Realtors and moderating today's discussion. I want to thank Chuck and the entirety of the Maryland Realtors, not just for convening today's very important program, but for everything that you and your members do. You are the face of Maryland as people consider moving to Maryland, staying in Maryland, often the front line of telling our story. The communities that we have, the schools we have, the opportunities rests on the shoulders of our realtors. I want to thank you, Chuck, your team, your members. I want to thank my good friend Bill Castelli for ensuring that I got to today's program. I think Jessica already mentioned Darrell Barnes. I think you'll hear from him later today, doing an extraordinary job as chair of Maryland's Legislative Black Caucus, and under his leadership have focused a great deal on homeownership issues, and the disparities and systemic barriers that are presented to communities of color in Maryland. And then finally, let me thank Antoine Thompson and Brian Green, bringing your expertise to advance equitable housing policies. Our country faces several crises all at once, which are change in the business of realtors and how Americans conceive of and even understand home ownership. Over the last several months, as the country has grappled with a global pandemic, our homes have turned into offices and schools as we've stayed home to stop the spread of the virus. The economic strain of the last few months has undoubtedly created uncertainty for realtors and for the families who you serve. And as our country this summer confronted longstanding racial injustices, we must recognize that addressing these issues will require a comprehensive look at every facet of our society. We need action to fix the injustices that exist in our criminal justice system, which we've seen once again on display with the shooting of Jacob Blake by officers who are sworn to protect him. We need solutions to address the racial health disparities that this pandemic has illustrated in stark detail. Disparities that have resulted in disproportionate infection and deaths for Black and brown communities. We need to recognize that gaps in our education system will continue to widen if we don't invest in our schools and in students in need. And we must acknowledge how our neighborhoods and homes connect all of these systems and can play an important role in making our communities more equitable, more diverse, more inclusive. Housing is an important factor in promoting an individual's educational, wealth, job, and health well-being. Black ownership consistently rates 20 to 30 percentage points lower than home ownership rates for white families in Maryland. And you know this data. The Prince George's County gap is about 20%, while in Baltimore City, it's nearly 30%. In fact, a college-educated African-American has a lower home ownership rate, right, as a group, than non-college educated white Americans. From the years 2000 to 2017, and again, I'm sure that you're familiar with this data, African-American home ownership rates have dropped. The Urban Institute estimates that had Black ownership rate remained the same during that time, there'd be an additional 700,000 African-American homeowners nationwide. And we know that this is such an impact, particularly on net worth and wealth accumulation, because so many Americans, not just African-Americans, point to the equity in their home as the primary source of net worth, which supports so many families through retirement. Home ownership is tied to our job prospects and opportunities, the schools our children attend, and the quality of the communities they grow up in. Home ownership provides families with stability, peace of mind, and the ability to build strong communities that look out for one another. And we know that home ownership is shaped by government policies at the federal, state, and local level. We can create a more equitable and just system by advancing policies that promote Black ownership and by reversing decisions that undermine those efforts. In recent weeks, the Trump administration has undermined the landmark Fair Housing Act through executive action. The Fair Housing Act not only banned discrimination, but required action to undo decades of federal, state, and local discriminatory policies and practices that perpetuated segregated communities. President Trump has discarded requirements for meaningful data to show compliance and instead is forcing us to rely solely on the word of local officials. That's not good enough. We need greater accountability to ensure that discriminatory practices of the past never return. As we work to prevent discrimination and increase oversight, we must also advance policies that remove historical barriers to Black home ownership. Barriers like the current process we use for credit scoring, which is essential to being approved for mortgages, particularly low interest mortgages and other home loans. Pilot models have shown that utilizing rent and utility payments as part of credit scoring could increase lending to African American and Latino home buyers by over 16%. These home buyers have demonstrated responsibility in their finances, and it's time that that is reflected in their credit scores. In January of this year, the House passed legislation to help make this a reality. We established new oversight of credit scoring models to ensure accuracy and to root out discrimination. We also directed the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to study how alternative credit scoring models could benefit individuals who are currently left behind by traditional credit scoring. But as we work to fight discrimination and promote Black home ownership, we must also recognize and aid those who are struggling right now during this pandemic. In May, the House passed the HEROES Act to give hardworking Americans throughout this country the relief that they need to put food on the table and to keep a roof over their heads. The HEROES Act includes several important provisions to protect homeowners and renters, including extending the foreclosure moratorium for all homeowners for 6 months, including a ban on repossessing mobile homes or recreational or motor vehicles used as dwellings. We ensure all homeowners can request forbearance for up to a year and require notifications from lenders to help borrowers understand their options, ensuring both new and long-standing homeowners can hold on to the homes they've earned. We require loss mitigation to ensure that no borrower is forced to pay a lump sum at the end of the forbearance period, ensuring we don't see a wave of foreclosures and evictions following this crisis. And we create a $75 billion homeowner assistance fund to prevent mortgage delinquencies or defaults, foreclosures, or the loss of utility services. And we fund housing counseling and fair housing enforcement to educate homeowners and help them navigate their housing options and rights. These policies and aid can help ease the fears and concerns that far too many families are feeling right now. Yet the Senate still refuses to act or even offer alternatives, and that's unacceptable. We have to continue to pressure the administration, the Republican-led Senate, to put politics aside and deliver for the American people. These are trying and uncertain times for this country for homeowners. We've seen over the last several months our communities step up and help those in need. We are stronger when families can rely on the stability of home ownership and the peace of mind that they will be able to stay in the home they've created. It'll take cooperation between federal, state, and local governments, as well as realtors and the private sector, to continue to make home ownership attainable for every American who seeks it. So again, thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for today's very important forum, for allowing me to bring brief words and observations. And I thank you for the work that you're going to do now and into the future. So back to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Congressman Brown. And thank you for reminding us of the importance of fair housing and that home ownership directly affects our quality of life. Somebody who has always been very vocal and interested in racial equity and fair housing in the Maryland State House is Delegate Darrell Barnes. Delegate Barnes has served Maryland's 25th district since 2015. And since 2017, Barnes has served as Deputy Majority Whip. And since 2018, he has been the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland. While Delegate Barnes was not able to join us today, representing him is his Chief of Staff, Dwayne London. Welcome, Dwayne. You have the stage.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate that. I'm not going to try to follow the congressman. I will keep my remarks brief. But once again, good afternoon, everyone. I am Dwayne London. I'm the Chief of Staff for Delegate Barnes. I'm also a 1L law student at the University of Baltimore, and I have about 5 years of experience working in state government. Once again, thank you for the opportunity in hosting this very important discussion. On behalf of Delegate Barnes, our entire office, and the constituents of District 25, the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland, I would just like to thank the members of this panel for coming together during our unprecedented circumstances to explore ways to address racial inequities in home ownership. Delegate Barnes believes that this discussion is absolutely critical, and we look forward to working with each and every one of you and exploring potential policy prescriptions that we can bring back to the Maryland General Assembly in order to eliminate some of the issues as it relates to racial inequities in real estate across the state of Maryland. So once again, thank you so much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dwayne. We appreciate that. And thank you for your service. Now allow me to introduce today's panelist, Mr. Brian Green. He serves as the Director of Fair Housing Policy for the National Association of Realtors. In this capacity, Brian represents NAR on all fair housing related federal regulatory and legislative matters to ensure that consumer and real estate industry interests are protected. This makes Brian an ideal panelist for today's very important discussion. Thank you for joining us, Brian.
You.
There you go.
Well, it's great to be here, and I want to commend the Maryland Realtors on your leadership and for focusing attention on this important day. Shall I just jump in, Jessica?
I'm actually going to flow. Thank you for.
Sorry.
Sorry. Hey, I have a script, but I'm sorry.
All right.
And next we have on the panel, we have Antoine Thompson as Executive Director of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. He heads the nation's largest and oldest minority trade association in this country. And this organization, its focus on its mission of democracy in housing. Antoine is focused on fair housing issues throughout his career, including public service in his hometown of Buffalo, New York, where he authored Buffalo's Fair Housing Law. I gotta get that. His work in real estate and fair housing makes him an ideal panelist for today's discussion. Thanks, Antoine, for joining us today. And finally, I'd like to introduce to you someone we all know, my colleague, Mr. Bill Castelli. He serves as Maryland Realtors Senior Vice President for Government Affairs. Bill will highlight some very interesting actions that can be taken ahead to the coming legislative session. I'm so excited to hear this. Thank you, Bill, for joining us. For now, back to you, Brian. I apologize for that. Let's move forward and let's get into it.
All right. Well, thanks, Jessica. So the New York Times ran a story 2 days ago, which was still making news yesterday, about a mixed race couple who were seeking home refinance, and they live in Jacksonville, Florida, and they estimated that their home would be appraised at about somewhere between $350,000 and $550,000. And they went and they had the appraisal done, and the appraiser came back with $330,000, so lower than even their low end. And this couple is an African-American woman and a white man. And the African-American woman had a suspicion, and she said to the bank that, you know, she wanted to order a new appraisal. And the bank said, yeah, this is surprisingly low. There must be some mistake. And so the wife, she removed all pictures from the home, and she removed her Toni Morrison novels and her Alice Walker novels and anything else that might suggest that Black people lived in this home. And she and her child went out to the mall, and her white husband stayed home when the appraiser came. And the new appraisal came in at $465,000. So over $100,000 difference, 40% difference. This underscores several problematic issues. One, the obvious one of just the fact that this would appear to be discrimination in appraisals. When there's knowledge that a Black family may live there, it's low. And then when it's apparent that a white person lives there, significantly higher. I think it also underscores that even when we're achieving minority home ownership, too often African-American homes are devalued. And so what we are shooting for to close the home ownership gap and to close the wealth gap may still be failing us if African Americans are not getting the appraisals they're entitled to. And this is some work that Andre Perry of the Brookings Institution has been highlighting. So when we succeed, we're still being thwarted. And then, you know, I think it also underscores the importance of testing, that we would not know that this is occurring but for this kind of evidence. And this family was smart that they did their own test. But not everyone's in the position to do that, right? Not everyone has that privileged information, which may be necessary for people to act and to obtain justice. So it's incumbent on us as professionals to make sure this practice isn't occurring. It's also incumbent on the government who are charged with enforcing the laws to do the investigations and to gather the evidence and to prosecute when these situations are occurring. So I want to talk about that because I think the final point here is, you know, this is taking money away from people. And this is harming consumers, it's harming communities, it's harming society. We're leaving money on the table. We could be a more prosperous country if we could address these issues, and that affects all of us. And so in the real estate profession, because this is what we're talking about, we need to be leaders. We need to address this. And I want to underscore that we need to deal with discrimination, just day-to-day discrimination that may occur in housing transactions. We need to deal with the gaps that are limiting opportunity for certain racial groups. And then finally, I want to say that we really also need to redress the historical harm that continues to frustrate us. Because even if we address discrimination today and, you know, stop it in its tracks now, we still have an intergenerational wealth differential, which will forever, or for a long time, disadvantage groups that have not had the opportunity to gain equity. And it will continue to have a rippling effect in our society. So we should be looking for solutions to also redress that past harm. So just on the first topic of non-discrimination. So certainly this underscores that we have a problem in appraisals that we need to address. Andre Perry, when he spoke to NAR, said that his research suggests that even when you factor out any legitimate criteria for appraisals, African Americans find that their home values are discounted at 28%. So 28% lower than they ought to be. So a systemic issue that we need to address. And this one we should be able to address. It's really one-dimensional. You've got folks in homes, you've got appraisers going in, and there aren't too many pieces to this one. So at the very least, we need to make sure that the people who are getting into homes are getting the full benefit of equity in home ownership. But then we have just the whole question of discrimination in the transaction. I joined NAR last November, and that was an eventful month. Within a couple of weeks, I had gone out to our annual convention, came back, just put my bags down, and Newsday up in New York put out a story about discrimination on Long Island. And in addition to this big investigation that they wrote up, they put a video online showing how agents were treating consumers differently, how African Americans were facing some form of discrimination 49% of the time, nearly half of the time in these transactions. Hispanic Americans, 39% of the time. Asian Americans, 19% of the time. And they had it on video. And it was really hard to explain it any other way. You had the same agent dealing with people of different backgrounds and telling them different things, telling white applicants that certain neighborhoods were bad and they don't want to live there, the schools are bad, and telling African American applicants, oh, this is a great place. I love everyone I meet here from this place. consistently talking to whites about schools, crime, resale value, and having a completely different conversation with minority applicants. And all too often, the agents captured on this video would cite the fair housing laws and how they're not supposed to engage in steering, how they're not supposed to engage in certain practices. But then they would tell the white clients, so I'll do it this way. And actually mock the training, the code of ethics, and the fair housing laws that have been on the books for 50 years. And so coming out of that, my third week on the job, I said, look, people are often saying, oh, well, we just need to do better training. This is not about training or training alone. This is about accountability, that there needs to be some consequence. This is also about culture, where if 52 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, people haven't embraced what it's about and are still acting in this way. Or they think that there is some reason they need to do this. And then finally, sure, we should do better training to shore up that end on, in terms of people who are trying to do the right thing or who might have unconscious biases. It didn't appear unconscious, what you saw in those videos. So that said, I said, we need to come up with some key things on accountability, culture change, and training. And that happened to spell a nice handy acronym, ACT. And I just tagged an exclamation point on the end to stress the urgency of it. And our leadership team announced in January that we were committing serious funds behind each of these efforts. I'll just very briefly describe a couple of things we're doing. It's not an exhaustive list of the things, but on training, insofar as, agents have been getting classroom training maybe for 50 plus years on fair housing, that may not be the only or the most effective training needed. So we are doing implicit bias training insofar as some agents may not recognize what they're doing. We want to show people how bias enters into the transactions. And we've worked with the Perception Institute, one, to produce a video that introduces this topic and how bias enters into the real estate transaction, sometimes unconsciously. That video's online at nar.realtor/fair-housing. You can find that. Actually, we have, I think, a new vanity URL, nar.realtor/bias-override as one word. And that is just an introduction to the subject, but a great video, 50 minutes long. Some people said, oh, it's too long. And I'm like, well, you're not going to overcome bias in 50 minutes. This is just the beginning. So we are developing a 3-hour curriculum with Perception Institute right now, and that's going to provide a curriculum that companies can provide to their agents. And we're going to look at how we can require or offer CE credits for this as well. Do everything that we can to make sure that the agents who need this get it. In addition to that, many of you may be familiar with Microsoft's new version of Flight Simulator, the game. We've got something that's a fair housing simulation, an online game, if you want to call it that, but basically online technology where you go through different scenarios of housing transactions, and this will evaluate how you meet these housing situations from a fair housing standpoint, and where you will actually get points or lose points based on how you rise to the challenge in terms of reputation risk, legal risk, and income loss, depending on your actions. So rather than just having folks in a classroom learn about this, confront them with actual situations and evaluate them. And the game will play with your perspective, where you might be in a transaction and think that you're the agent, and then you discover you're actually the consumer. And so it does a 360 on this and deals with all these different issues. And even right now, as we're developing it, some pretty challenging questions that really hone your thinking on the fair housing principles. So that's one thing we're doing. On culture change, I recognize that with the New York Newsday study investigation, that not every agent that they tested engaged in discrimination. In fact,
Right.
of the 12 companies that they tested, 2 had no findings at all. They tested multiple agents at those companies. And I said, well, this is very interesting. So you have these companies together responsible for 50% of the sales out in Long Island, and 2 prosperous companies with no findings. We need to sort of better understand what some of those companies are doing so that they aren't being cited in this way. And it led to an idea that we need to highlight some leaders in fair housing, because folks do learn from their peers. And we're working on a film about some of the leaders in fair housing, some of the more most successful agents in the country who are living by fair housing principles. So that's another big thing we're doing. And then in terms of accountability, we're making sure that state laws are effective in providing consequences when people engage in discrimination, that we're actually addressing discrimination as it occurs at the state level, and that people lose their license if they engage in this kind of behavior.
Right.
So all of these things just to do no harm, and this is actually the bare minimum. I see
Right.
Jessica looking to get in here.
Right.
I've only talked about just what we're doing to make sure the situation doesn't get worse, but I hope I'll have an opportunity to talk about the more proactive things we need to do.
Oh, yeah. We're just to pivot a little bit, Brian, and thank you for giving us an update on all the work that the National Association of Realtors are doing. And I hope that our audience has had a chance to look at the unconscious bias video. Is worth it. And we appreciate us moving forward with this movement. And I want to pivot a minute, and Anton, could you comment on that New York Times article that Brian brought up? I thought it was very interesting. It's very current, as well as the Newsday. If you had a chance to see that documentary out of Long Island. And then I know you have a lot of information that you want to dive right into with your presentation, but if you can comment on that a little bit and let's get some discussion going. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I want to first thank you for having me, and it's good to see Brian is doing a phenomenal job, and I want to thank Chuck and Bill for all the hard work they're doing in the state of Maryland. That article yesterday was extremely disappointing.
Great.
We know that there is a tremendous need for more diversity in the appraisal industry. That was one of the first affiliates that came out of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. And it's a never-ending struggle, because, as Brian indicated, when we undervalue properties, that takes wealth out of the pockets of families. So we've got to continue to change that. We've got to increase penalties when people do things wrong, and we got to make the public more aware of their rights and responsibilities, because, believe it or not, a lot of people just don't know how to handle those situations. Lastly, on the issue of fair housing in Long Island, unfortunately, what happened in Long Island last year is not unique. It's just that folks got caught doing it. The HUD needs to provide more funding for testing. State governments need to provide more funding for testing. And as Brian indicated, there needs to be more consequences when people get caught. And the more people get caught and the more people are exposed, there's nothing like a good old thing called transparency and sunlight. So I think those things will improve the situation. I'd like to go right into my presentation, if that's good.
Fine.
Give me 1 second here. Trying to get going here. Yeah, bear with me. Oh. Excuse me. All right, I'm trying to click it here. Just give me 1 second. Can you all see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so they asked me to talk today in light of what happened with George Floyd and the never-ending struggle for racial, economic equity, and equality in the country, I just wanted to provide a few quick snapshots on some of the things that the National Association of Real Estate Brokers believes is important to close the racial wealth gap in the country. Every year, the association puts out a State of Housing in Black America report where we examine a lot of the challenges and opportunities as it relates to closing that wealth gap in the country. Last month, the census put out every quarter, for those of you who don't know, they put out different estimates on Black home ownership rates. And their recent number was 47% for whites, 76% for Blacks. Some in the industry have said that that number might be a little skewed because of how they sample people based on COVID. But we know prior to that, it had risen a little bit up to 44%. But it's still a 30-point gap between Black home ownership and white home ownership in the country. You know, one of the things that we often talk about is that Black home ownership is important. It strengthens families, it stabilizes neighborhoods, creates jobs, and it's important to the local state economy. Over 40% of small businesses start in the home. And education and economic outcomes are impacted by this. One of the things that I did do was look at some of the trends in Maryland. As you can see, the white ownership rate in Maryland is at 76% compared to 51% according to Prosperity Now. I also took a look at some of the key cities and counties with higher populations of African Americans. I just wanted to get a quick snapshot for everyone watching. As you can see, Baltimore City, while it has a large African American population, the white homeownership rate is actually almost 20 points higher than the Black homeownership rate, which says, and in fact, since 2008, the Black homeownership rate in Baltimore has been on a steady decline, despite having large tracts of vacant housing. We also looked at lending trends in Baltimore City. As you will see, this is from last year. The African Americans are denied almost at twice the rate of whites in the city when they apply for a mortgage in the city of Baltimore. We also looked at Montgomery County as well. Just make sure I monitor my time. We also looked at Baltimore County as well. And as you can see, based on this sheet, African Americans have decent sized population in the county, but there in the county of Montgomery, it's over a 30-point difference in home ownership between Blacks and whites in Montgomery County. Some of these numbers are just unbelievable. We also looked at some of the lending patterns. As you can see, African Americans are approved at 50. They got about 54% of the mortgages in that county, but they were denied almost 1.5 times whites in the county. We also looked at the so-called big Black county of Prince George's County, where I live. You can see the population there, a largely African American population. You look at the homeownership rate, definitely higher than the national average for African Americans. But as you can see, the white homeownership rate, even in the most affluent Black county in the country, the white homeownership rate is still 16 points higher. That's a number that really needs to be talked about more, that we've got to do more to increase homeownership. And this is another slide that I thought was really interesting. In this county, even the so-called Black county of the state, affluent Black county, African Americans are still denied at a major difference compared to whites, as you can see that. So those are some real stark numbers. I did go really quickly about how do we communicate as we begin talking about how do we change the situation. We use the words accessible, sustainable, and affordable homeownership, that we got to protect the American dream. And this is most important, that this is the #1 way that we create and transfer wealth in the country. I wanted to share some quick stats for you. There are 1.7 million Black millennials in the country that make over $100,000 a year. There are over 100,000 between Baltimore and DC, Metro DC. So there's a tremendous business opportunity to grow Black homeownership right in Maryland. Some of the things that we are doing is really trying to engage our members, pushing an aggressive policy agenda, and trying to do more public awareness. Some of the things that we're doing at the national level to promote homeownership include making sure that homeownership is seen as a public policy priority. If you all remember, in 2017, there was an assault on the 30-year mortgage. We're still trying to protect that. And we're trying to, really next year, the fight is going to be about protecting the mortgage interest deduction, which was weakened. Preserving the QM patch, expanding HUD Section 184, which provides mortgage assistance to Native Americans and Hawaiians. We want to make sure that the feds create a African American homeownership program. We're pushing the American Dream down payment program. And there's a number of other things that we have been fighting for and against. At the state level, these are some quick things that we think that you all can do at the state level. One is increasing funding for down payment assistance programs, reforming the credit score criteria for mortgage down payment assistance programs. Believe it or not, they are not really friendly to FHA borrowers, many of the programs. And actually, just for this group understands that less than 5% of mortgages from Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae go to African Americans. African Americans are disproportionately in FHA borrowers. So if Maryland has programs that are not FHA friendly for DPAs, you're basically shutting out a large segment of your population. We must engage corporate and foundation leaders around down payment assistance. We should set a goal to help increase the statewide goal to increase the rate of Black homeownership in the state of Maryland. And we must get more lenders, increase lender participation in Maryland programs. Believe it or not, there are not enough lenders, especially national lenders, in many of the Maryland state programs. Lastly, this is something that I think we really need to do in 2021. There's a shortage of inventory in many parts of the state. The fees to building a new home are off the charts in Maryland. We've really got to change that at the county and state level. It's costing anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 additional dollars for a buyer to buy a house in the state of Maryland, and that builder just passes that cost right onto the buyer. We need to really look at that, and hopefully we have some discussion of those. Thank you.
All right. I know that Bill has been waiting patiently. Bill, and I know you have some policy that's being flushed out right now, but if you can get into some of the things that the Maryland Realtors advocacy team is working on to address some of these issues.
Thanks, Jessica. And I'll talk a little bit about and follow what Antoine was saying about housing supply. Housing supply is a big issue. It's a big component of this. You know, with lower supply, higher demand, prices go up. That makes all the barriers that we see that are most problematic for first-time buyers. That's closing costs, that's down payments, even higher with higher prices. So it just increases the barrier significantly. So we know supply is a big part of this. The legislature's actually been looking at a number of issues that are related to land use policies. One of the things that they've taken action on in the last couple of years, which was a bill we supported, was adding a housing element to all of the comprehensive plans that the local counties are doing. And there were aspects of all of their plans that already addressed some housing issues, but this specifically asked them to address that workforce housing, that low income housing that is more likely to be affordable to first-time buyers, people trying to get into the market. And honestly, you know, that is so important for the real estate market's health, is making sure that we have new buyers. So that's a big issue. That's going to continue to be an issue. I know last year they were going to tweak, there was a bill that was going to tweak that housing element plan a little bit more, be a little more directive in the types of housing that we would want for workforce housing. That bill, because the session was cut short, ended up not passing the Senate, but it did pass the House pretty significantly. But they're also taking a look at other issues as well, including you know, some very controversial ideas like by right zoning, which gives an individual property owner the right to increase density as long as it's for residential units. That bill kind of morphed into the bill that would have created a little more specificity in the housing element. But there are all of these discussions about supply and what its impacts are and how it impacts first-time buyers and just the housing gap that we see with Black homeowners and white homeowners. So there's a lot of focus on issues like that. And because of the kind of discussions that happened last year, we know some legislators are discussing maybe taking that by right idea and narrowing it a little bit. Maybe we narrow it to some institutions that have significant tracts of land and would be able to provide a significant portion of residential units, and giving them the right to proceed more in a less costly way, in a more efficient way too. So there's going to be some focus on that as well. You know, the Baltimore cities had a transportable homestead tax credit, which allows a homeowner to essentially keep their homestead tax credit, which keeps the cost of the taxes on their property lower, and carry it on to their next property, thus opening up properties that might be more affordable to first-time buyers. Sometimes we do get homeowners who are not landlocked, but reluctant to move to another property if they're going to lose a tax advantage like that. So, you know, that's another idea that Baltimore's kind of explored, and certainly I know there have been over time legislators talking about whether that should be expanded or not in other counties. And then right now, the state of Maryland is actually conducting a housing needs assessment. And that housing needs assessment is taking a look at a bunch of different jurisdictions in Maryland, from Western Maryland to Eastern Maryland, Eastern Shore of Maryland, Southern Maryland, the DC suburbs, as well as the Baltimore region, and coming up with very specific plans. And a lot of what they're identifying as potential solutions really track a lot of what Antoine was talking about. Expanded funding for some of the MMP programs, but also trying to increase those down payment assistance programs that the state runs as well, making sure that that assistance is there, and trying to grow the first-time home buyer base, because we've seen a 30-year, and this crosses all racial demographics, but a 30-year low in terms of our first-time buyers. So we know supply is an issue. We know that there are programs out there that are working. And I think these are some of the ideas that you'll hear not only discussed in the 2021 session, but also, these discussions are going on outside of the legislature as well. Lots of groups focusing on what they can do and how they can improve this situation.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. Anton, we had a really good question to come in the chat on some of your statistics that you showed in your presentation. This audience participant said, in terms of these homeownership statistics, does this capture owner-occupied stats only, or does it look more broadly at ownership of investment and rental properties as well? Great question.
Most of them are 4 units or less, the lending trends. So they would include owner occupied 4 units or less. So that can be, 2 family, 3 family, or 4 unit owner occupied, primarily those. And I also wanted just to mention, I did not get a chance to normally for an issue like this, I should have, and I apologize for not giving a historical context of why we fight for these issues. I think it's imperative for this audience to understand that when NARAP was founded in 1947, not only could we not be members of the Realtor organization, but also at that time, African Americans were coming home from World War II, and they had this program called the GI Bill that excluded African Americans for many, many years. Prior to that, FDR, the so-called Great Democrat, helped create a program for protecting the providing liquidity in the mortgage market. But African Americans cannot get access to those programs. So we had to go through contract loans as opposed to, for over 30 years, Fannie Mae, HUD is precursor to HUD. All these programs were basically excluded African Americans for over 25 to 30 years. And they actually had red line maps that were down on the Capitol Hill that prevented African Americans from having access to these mortgages. So some of these policies that we're talking about are to correct historical wrongs, and it's really important. The white ownership gap that exists today between blacks and whites did not happen by its own. It was intentional, it was deliberate, and that was coupled with racially restrictive covenants where whites cannot even sell to African Americans in certain neighborhoods. So I just wanted to share that for this group. There was a lot in the chat. I strongly encourage this group of individuals to do some quick Google searches, go on our website, go on the NAR website, go to nareb.com. We have a whole fair housing page. Watch some of those videos. You will learn a lot. And give me a call if you ever want to talk. I love to talk.
Thank you,
Antoine.
Thank you for that historical data. That is really important. And Brian, I know we were on time, but I wanted to pivot back to you because there were a few things that you wanted to come back to some of the solutions that the National Association of Realtors they're working on.
Yeah, well, first I just want to underscore what Antoine said, that it's important that people face these facts squarely. And beyond the examples that Antoine even provided, of course, we had whole subdivisions which were built with federal dollars that excluded African Americans. And the example you always hear about is Levittown, and how now those homes have greatly appreciated, but African Americans coming back as GIs were not allowed to live in Levittown, and those homes have greatly appreciated and have provided intergenerational wealth for several generations. And Levittown, modest homes, those homes are worth quite a lot, and it's still only 1% African American. So the landscape that we know today was very much shaped by actions that occurred following World War II. And we can't forget that. And if people need more recent examples of the loss of African American wealth, you don't need to look much farther than the subprime mortgage crisis and the many communities, middle-class African American communities, that were targeted for predatory loans. I can tell you, personal experiences of communities that I knew where people owned their homes straight out, or were in the process of paying off their mortgages, who were targeted for subprime refinance schemes and home improvement loans and the like. And so that zapped a lot of wealth just in the last 20 years. And that's affected the homeownership gap and another generation who could not then pass on wealth to their children. So I guess the one quick thing I'll say is that all of the programs that Antoine and Bill talked about are very important, and are key, and they sort of meet people where they are to try to make sure that people who can qualify for homes get those opportunities and provide additional assistance. But I do think that there's opportunities at the state level to target assistance and to look at how to address historical wrongs that maybe have affected specific communities or specific families. And there are opportunities for some of the lenders and other companies who are looking for ways to address systemic racism to actually look at their own practices and their own historical practices and try to right them. Private companies can do that. Just from a conceptual framework, I think that should be on the table, that states, cities, like say cities that underwent urban renewal and actually destroyed communities, look at some of these factors. This is part of what the government even requires for cities who are getting community development block grant funds. And so there's opportunities for cities and states to get involved politically with those issues to try to create a more restorative social policy and economic policy that could potentially level the playing field.
If I could just add one quick thing in there. I just wanted to share with you folks, and maybe I'll put it in a chat for them, but there are 3 really good books that for folks who want to grow their knowledge on this subject matter. One is a book that I read in college, and this one I really learned about this. It's called Crabgrass Frontier by Ken Jackson. It's called Crabgrass Frontier. Beautiful, amazing book about the suburbanization of America and what America did to do that. The second is the book called Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. He examines lending trends going back and policies that were made and created by the federal government to help whites dating back well over 150 years or so. And the last thing is a hot book that's out right now called Race for Profit by Dr. Taylor. Really great book, Imada Taylor, great book that looks at how African Americans have been consistently exploited in the real estate industry. So those are 3 really good books that give you a great snapshot on these inequities that exist in the real estate industry.
Awesome. Before we close out, I had another great question that came from the chat, and feel free to chime in. But one of our participants wanted to know, can any of the panelists provide recommendations of nonprofits or organizations that a company could donate to in relation to this topic? So they're looking for organizations to support that are doing the work to address these issues.
Well, I can always say NARAB is a 501c6.
Great plug, Anton.
We live and breathe it every single day, and we always take contributions. You can Google me or go to nareb.com or antoine.thompson@nareb.com. So we deal with it every day. I also chair the board of Housing Options Planning Enterprises in Prince George's County. I would be remiss as the board chair to not say that is a great organization that's helping with housing counseling, fair housing, and keeping people from getting evicted and all those good things as well.
Awesome.
Awesome. HOPE in Maryland, Prince George's
Thank
County.
you. You can actually drop that in the chat. That would be.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out here.
Awesome. Nice to see you, Chuck. Let's close this thing out. This was amazing.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Jessica, Brian, Antoine, Bill. Dwayne, you didn't get to speak a whole lot, but thanks for coming. Unless you had something else you wanted to add at the last minute, we're happy to hear from you.
Okay, I'm unmuted. No, I would just say, hey, this was a fabulous discussion. And I would love to follow up on the discussion. I will drop, contact information in the chat, because Delegate Barnes obviously wants to get involved with some of the policy prescriptions that were mentioned. And so obviously a follow-up would be great. So I'm sure.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And that really helps me to wrap this up and really kind of incorporating what Brian said, because it's one of the things that we talk about here all the time. we're focusing now on, federal actions, state actions. The rubber's going to hit the road at the local level. That's where all of the land use decisions are made. And one of the constraints we're going to witness, and we do all the time, is what are the proper roles of the different levels of government in making these land use decisions? That's going to be to me, to really get to the heart of the matter, that's where a lot of this is going to play out. And so we have already kind of penciled in for the fall a follow-up to this with getting some local people involved, the Maryland Association of Counties, local county executives, county council, Baltimore City people, because that's where a lot of these really, the actions that are going to have meaningful impact, that's where they're going to happen ultimately, unless there's a state takeover of land use, which nobody's really, intending on proposing. The other thing is, some of this stuff, really the only limit is our imagination in terms of how we approach these. And you look at some very imaginative things going on. I think when Antoine and I talked about this, we could do much better leveraging 203K rehab loans, for example.
Right.
There are so many things. I just saw a video about a law that just passed in Los Angeles County, where by right you can convert a garage into housing. And there are companies whose the business model is they undertake all of the construction and they get back some of it. It's 15-year lease, basically. The homeowner gets $500 or $600 a month once they rent the place. This company does all of it, soup to nuts, permitting, construction, property management. And after 15 years, the homeowner gets the unit free and clear after getting several $1,000s of income in addition to that. So really, there's just so many, we're a nation of ideas, and we need to just keep putting these ideas out there. And then, of course, we're advocates, right? Antoine,
Absolutely.
right, Brian? Right, Bill?
That's right.
That's what
Absolutely.
we do. So for us to say that we don't have a role in this or that we can't help, it's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to, anybody who's listening, we're pledging Maryland Realtors, the National Association of Realtors, NAREB, our advocacy. This is what we're going to be focusing on for the next few years. There's no question, and forever, really, because it's going to take that long ultimately. And we don't want to tell people, oh, be patient. We talked about this yesterday. There are short, medium, and long-term things. Obviously, it's 400 years in the making, so we're not going to fix it in the 21 General Assembly session. But at the same time, I don't want people to say, oh, here they are telling us to be patient again. And people, a lot of these unrest is because the Black community especially, they've been patient. And I don't think anybody can blame them for running out of patience. So I think we need, there is a need to show real meaningful reforms soon. And so, that's our pledge. We are advocates. It's what we do, and we're pretty darn good at it. So hold us accountable as we are going to hold state, federal, and local government officials accountable. And that's our pledge.
Thank you all.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And we're recording this, so if you missed any of it or want to share it, it'll be up on the website in a few days.
Hey, Jessica, I didn't know how to put something in the chat.
Okay.
Can you type
you
those
can-
books in there? Because I do not know how to do it. I'm having technical problems here.
Antoine, this is Dan Petrell. If you send me the book lists and the names, I will put a nice post on Facebook for everybody to follow along with.
Thank you, Dan.
And
I
also,
will.
there's been
Thank
several
you.
requests for your slides. If you can give us that, we'll share
Sure,
that.
I'll do that both. No problem.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Fantastic group, and we appreciate everybody's insight, and we look forward to where we take this issue going forward. Our next webinar is going to be September 10th, featuring our friend again, Bill Castelli, talking about brokers, and we'll get more meat on that topic when we very soon. Until then, have a great day, and thank you again for joining us on this really important topic.
Thanks, everybody.